Lyra stood at the edge of the cliff, looking down at the vast human world spreading out before her like a map drawn by fate itself. 300 years had passed since she last visited a human settlement, and even then she had gone in disguise, her silver hair hidden beneath dark cloth, her pointed ears covered. The humans had been cruel then, hunting anything that looked different, but times changed. Stories traveled on the wind and through the birds. The humans below had grown different. Some of them had learned to value knowledge over gold. Some had learned to question old hatreds. But Lyra had no time for history lessons today. Ember was dying, and that was all that mattered. The great dragon lay in the cave behind her breathing shallow and pained. Ash had refused to leave Ember's side, staying coiled around the red dragon like a protector who could ward off death itself through sheer stubbornness. Lyra had tried everything she knew. She had gathered herbs from the highest peaks where the air was thin and pure. She had performed the old rituals that her mother had taught her centuries ago, calling upon the ancient magic that still lived in the mountains. Nothing worked. The fever burned through Ember like a wildfire, consuming her strength day by day. Lyra had made her decision 3 sunrises ago. She would seek help from the humans. It was madness, perhaps. It was certainly dangerous, but love made you do impossible things. It made you cross barriers that your people had built over thousands of years. It made you believe that even old enemies might become allies when the stakes were high enough. She descended the mountain path carefully, taking the secret trails that only the oldest dragons knew. The path twisted through forests of ancient pine and across streams that sang with the voices of water spirits. By the time she reached the foothills, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The human settlement called itself Riverside. It was built along a wide river that flowed east toward the ocean, and the buildings were made of wood and stone that humans had quarried from the earth. Smoke rose from chimneys carrying the smell of food and fire. Lyra could hear the sounds of human voices, children laughing, someone singing a work song. It was strange how different it felt from the silence of the mountains. She wrapped her cloak tighter around herself, trying to cover her pointed ears as much as possible. Her silver hair was still visible, but in the twilight perhaps the humans would mistake it for pale blonde. Perhaps they would see only another traveler coming to their town seeking shelter and food. The first person to notice her was a child, a girl no more than 6 years old with dirt on her face and wonder in her eyes. The child stared at Lyra without fear, which surprised her. Most children feared what they did not understand. "Where are you going, lady?" the child asked, stepping closer instead of running away. Lyra chose her words carefully, speaking in the human language that felt thick and awkward on her tongue. "I'm looking for a healer, someone who knows about sickness and medicine." The child pointed toward a wooden building near the center of the settlement. "That is where Claire lives. She knows about everything that makes people sick. My mother says Claire is the smartest person in all of Riverside." Lyra thanked the child and pressed forward, her heart beating faster now. She was actually going to do this. She was actually going to walk into a human settlement and ask for help. If her people found out, they would cast her from the mountains forever. They would call her a traitor to elven kind, but Ember was more important than any ancient law or tradition. The healer's building stood out from the others because it had more windows, and the door was painted blue. Lyra took a deep breath and knocked, trying to make her voice sound as human as possible when she called out. A woman opened the door. She was tall for a human, with dark hair streaked with gray, and eyes that seemed to see straight through to the heart of things. She wore a simple dress stained with what looked like medicine and dust. Her hands were calloused from work, and her face bore the lines of someone who had spent her life caring for others. The woman's eyes went wide when she saw Lyra. Her hand moved toward something at her belt, but then she stopped. She studied Lyra's face carefully, studying the pointed ears that the cloak had slipped away from, studying the silver hair and the ancient sadness in her eyes. "You are not from Riverside," the woman said. "I would have remembered meeting you." Lyra decided that lying would only make things worse. "No, I am Lyra of the Shadow Peak Mountains. I have come seeking help. My dragon is very sick, and I believe that you might have knowledge that could save her life." The woman did not scream. She did not call for guards or weapons. Instead, she opened the door wider and said, "Come inside. Quickly. Before people start asking questions. My name is Claire, and I think we have much to discuss." Inside the healer's home, Lyra found walls lined with bottles and jars and dried plants hanging from the ceiling. There were books written in human script, and instruments made of metal and glass that served purposes Lyra could not even guess at. The air smelled of herbs and cleanliness, and Lyra felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen slightly. Claire made tea and listened as Lyra explained everything. She told the healer about Ember's fever, about how it had started 5 days ago with the dragon refusing to eat. She described the way Ember's scales had lost their color, and how the dragon's breathing had become shallow and pained. She explained that no herbal remedy or elven magic had worked. Claire listened without interrupting, occasionally asking questions in a gentle voice. When Lyra finished speaking, the healer stood up and went to a shelf, pulling down several books and opening them to specific pages. "What you are describing sounds like a blood infection," Claire said, pointing to passages in her books. "I have seen something similar in horses and in humans, though it is rare. The cause is usually a wound that has become corrupted. The fever spreads through the body, poisoning everything. It is very difficult to treat, but I have heard of people recovering when they were given the right medicine at the right time." Lyra felt hope kindle in her chest. "You think you can help her?" "I cannot promise anything," Claire said honestly, "but I would like to try. However, Lyra, I need you to understand something. If people in this settlement find out that there is a dragon nearby, they will be afraid. They might try to hurt your dragon before they even understand what is happening. Humans fear what they do not know." "Then we will not tell them," Lyra said. "We will work in secret. I will bring my dragon to a place far from your settlement, somewhere hidden. You can come to me if you wish to help, but I will not put my companions in danger." Claire nodded slowly. "That is wise. We will need supplies, though. Medicine that takes days to prepare, and I will need to see the dragon to understand exactly what we are facing. Can you bring me to her tonight?" Lyra stood, relief washing through her like water. "Yes. The mountain is only an hour's journey from here if we move quickly." "Wait," Claire said, holding up a hand. "I need to tell my apprentice where I am going. He will worry otherwise, and he might do something foolish. Let me write him a message." While Claire prepared supplies and wrote instructions for her apprentice, Lyra waited by the window, looking out at the human settlement. She could see people moving between buildings, carrying goods and calling to each other. She could see a group of children playing with a ball made of cloth and straw. She could see families gathered around evening fires, preparing food and settling in for the night. These humans were just living their lives, unaware that an elf stood in their settlement, unaware that in the mountains above them, an ancient dragon was fighting for every breath, unaware that everything was about to change. Claire emerged from her home carrying a large leather bag filled with bottles and tools and folded cloth. She locked her door and turned to Lyra with determination in her eyes. "Lead the way," she said. "We have a dragon to save, and I think this might be the beginning of something important for both our peoples." Together, they walked away from Riverside, moving toward the mountains where Ash and Ember waited. Behind them, the settlement lights twinkled like earthbound stars, and above them, the first real stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Everything was about to change, and neither of them knew it yet. The mountain path became steeper as Lyra and Claire climbed higher into the night. The human woman moved with surprising grace for someone unaccustomed to mountain terrain, placing her feet carefully on the narrow trail and using her hands to steady herself against the stone. Lyra watched her with a mixture of admiration and concern. Humans were fragile creatures, their bodies lasting such a short time compared to elves. But Claire did not complain or slow down. She simply kept moving forward. By the time they reached the cave, the moon had risen high enough to cast silver light across the rocky slopes. Ash was waiting outside, his massive form silhouetted against the entrance. When he saw Lyra, he released a low rumble that echoed across the mountain. But when he saw Claire, he tensed, preparing to attack. "No, Ash," Lyra said, holding up her hand. "This human comes to help Ember. She is a friend." The ancient blue dragon studied Claire for a long moment, his golden eyes reflecting the moonlight like twin moons themselves. Slowly, he lowered his head, allowing the human woman to approach. Claire, to her great credit, did not back away or show fear. Instead, she walked forward and placed her small human hand on Ash's scaled snout. "Thank you for trusting me," she said simply. Inside the cave, Ember lay exactly where Lyra had left her. The red dragon had grown weaker in just the few hours since Lyra had departed. Her breathing was shallow, barely moving her chest. Her scales, which once burned with the color of autumn fire, had faded to the dull red of old brick. When she heard voices, she tried to lift her head, but the effort seemed to exhaust her completely. Claire immediately began her examination. She pulled out instruments from her leather bag and checked every part of the dragon. She looked in Ember's eyes, checked the color of her mouth and tongue, felt along her body searching for wounds. She asked Lyra questions in a rapid stream, and the elf answered each one, describing everything she had noticed and everything she had tried. After a long time, Claire sat back on her heels and looked up at Lyra. "I found it," she said. "There is a small wound on her back leg hidden by the scales. Do you see?" She pointed to a spot that Lyra had not noticed before. "The wound has become infected. The infection has spread through her blood, which is why she has the fever and weakness." "It is exactly what I thought. Can you help her?" Lyra asked, fear making her voice tremble. "I can try," Claire replied, "but I need to work carefully and slowly. First, I need to clean the wound properly. Then I need to prepare a special medicine that I have only used on horses before, never on a dragon. I will need to come back here every day for at least 10 days. I will need your help holding her still while I work. And Lyra, I need you to understand that even if we do everything correctly, the dragon might still be too weak to survive." Lyra knelt beside Ember and pressed her forehead against the dragon's scaled head. "We will do everything," she whispered. "We will save her. We must save her." That night, Claire began the first treatment. She heated water over a fire that Lyra built, using herbs and special mixtures from her bag to clean the wound. Ember whimpered in pain, a sound that tore at Lyra's heart, but the dragon did not pull away. Even in her weakened state, Ember seemed to understand that this human woman was trying to help. When the wound was clean, Claire prepared a medicine using ingredients she mixed very carefully. She made Lyra write down every step, every measurement, every detail. "If something happens to me," she explained, "you will need to know how to continue the treatment. This medicine is critical." As dawn began to break, Lyra and Claire sat outside the cave, exhausted but hopeful. The human woman looked at the mountains awakening around them, at the way the sunlight touched the peaks and turned them gold. "In my lifetime, I have never seen dragons this close," Claire said. "I was taught that dragons were monsters that destroyed settlements and hoarded gold like it was the most important thing in existence. But Ember is not a monster. She is just a creature like any other, trying to survive in a difficult world. My people believe similar things about humans," Lyra admitted. "We were taught that you were careless and cruel and destructive, that you destroyed everything beautiful and replaced it with ugliness. I think perhaps both our peoples have been wrong about each other," Claire smiled. "Then perhaps this is the beginning of something different. Perhaps this is how understanding starts, with one human and one elf working together to save a dragon." Over the next 10 days, Claire made the journey from Riverside to the mountains every single day. She never faltered, never complained about the difficult climb or the dangerous paths. She simply came each day with her supplies and her determination, working carefully to clean Ember's wound and prepare the special medicine. On the 7th day, Ember ate. It was only a small amount of food and she was still very weak, but she actually ate. Lyra cried when she saw it, overwhelmed by hope and gratitude. On the 10th day, Claire examined the wound and declared it to be healing properly. The infection was disappearing. Ember's color was returning. The fever had broken 3 days ago, but now the dragon was actually recovering instead of just surviving. "You did it," Lyra said, hugging the human woman in a way that would have scandalized her entire family. "You saved her life. We did it together," Claire corrected. "I brought the knowledge, but you brought the love and determination. That is what truly saved her." By the 15th day, Ember was strong enough to stand. By the 21st day, she could fly short distances. By the 30th day, she was nearly back to normal, her scales glowing with their old fire-bright color, her movements sure and powerful. On that day, Ash approached Claire and did something that shocked the human woman. The ancient dragon lowered his massive head and gently touched his forehead to her forehead. It was a gesture of profound respect and gratitude. Claire reached up and placed her hands on either side of Ash's head. "Thank you," she whispered, "for trusting me with your family." Lyra stood watching the two of them, the human and the ancient dragon, and she understood that something had truly shifted in the world. The old walls between species were not gone, but they had cracked. They had become permeable. And through those cracks, friendship and understanding could begin to grow. "I have to return to Riverside soon," Claire said to Lyra. "My apprentice will start wondering if I have been kidnapped by bandits. But I want to come back. Not to heal anyone, but simply to visit, to talk with you and learn about your world. Would that be possible?" Lyra smiled, and it was a genuine smile, full of warmth and connection. "Yes, Claire. That would be more than possible." "That would be wonderful. Come whenever you wish. You will always be welcome in the mountains." As Claire began her descent back to Riverside, carrying with her the knowledge that dragons were real and that miracles could happen when humans and elves worked together, Lyra stood beside her dragons and watched the sunset. Everything had changed, and she had a feeling that this was only the beginning. 2 months passed and the seasons began to shift. The mountain air grew cooler, and the leaves in the lower forest turned gold and red. Claire came to visit the dragons and Lyra every few days, bringing supplies and knowledge from the human settlement. She shared stories about her life in Riverside, about the people she helped, about the apprentice named Thomas who was learning her healing skills. But something had changed in Riverside. The townspeople had begun to notice that Claire was spending considerable time away from the settlement. They had seen her leave with supplies that seemed far too extensive for normal trips. The gossip started slowly, whispers at the market and in the taverns. Some people wondered if Claire had gone mad. Others speculated about what she could possibly be doing in the mountains for days at a time. One evening, Claire arrived looking troubled. She sat by the fire outside the cave and explained what was happening. "The mayor is concerned," she told Lyra. "He thinks I might be in danger. He is considering sending people to follow me and find out where I have been going. If they discover the dragons, Lyra, everything changes. The humans in Riverside are good people, but they are still afraid of what they do not understand. They might see Ember and Ash as threats rather than as creatures who need protection." Lyra felt worry settle in her chest like a stone. "What do you think we should do?" Claire thought carefully, her hands wrapped around a cup of hot tea. "I think we need to prepare them. We need to give them time to understand before they discover the truth on their own. I want to tell the mayor about you and the dragons. Not all at once, but gradually. I want to help him understand that elves and dragons are not monsters." "It is a great risk," Lyra said. "What if humans fear what they learn? What if they come with weapons? Then we will have done our best and the choice will be in human hands," Claire replied. "But Lyra, I believe in my people. I believe that when they see Ember and Ash, when they meet you, they will choose understanding over fear. Not all of them, perhaps, but enough. Enough to make a difference." Lyra looked at her dragons. Ember had recovered completely, and had even put on weight during her recovery. She moved with strength and grace, and her eyes held the brightness of health and vitality. Ash watched everything with the wisdom of his ancient years. Both dragons had become accustomed to Claire's presence. They treated her not as a healer or a human, but as a friend. "Do what you think is right," Lyra told Claire. "I trust you." The next day, Claire sat with the mayor of Riverside in his office. His name was William, and he was a careful man who took his responsibilities seriously. Claire began by telling him that she had met someone from the mountains who needed help. She described Lyra but left out the elf details at first. She talked about a woman who was intelligent and noble, and who loved her companions fiercely. The mayor listened with the patience of someone who had learned that Claire's judgment was usually sound. When she finally told him that Lyra was an elf, he set down his drink and studied Claire carefully. "You expect me to believe in elves?" he said slowly. "In my 63 years, I have never met anyone who had actually seen an elf. I am telling you what is true," Claire responded firmly. "I have met her. I have spent time in her presence. She is real and she is good. And she is not alone." That was when Claire told him about the dragons. She described Ember and Ash in detail, explaining how she had healed Ember from a life-threatening infection. She told him about the intelligence in their eyes and the way they had trusted her with their well-being. The mayor was quiet for a very long time. Then he asked a simple question. "Do they pose a threat to Riverside?" "No," Claire answered. "They live in the mountains far from any human settlement. They have no interest in human affairs." Lyra simply wanted help for her companion. She came to me because she believed that humans had knowledge that elves did not. She was right. William stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the town he had governed for 20 years. "I need to meet her," he said finally. If I am going to speak to the townspeople about elves and dragons, I need to look into their eyes and make my own judgment. Can you arrange this? Claire nodded. I will speak with Lyra. She will want to be careful, but I think she will agree. 3 days later, the mayor of Riverside stood in the mountains looking at an elf woman and 2 dragons for the first time in his life. Lyra had chosen to meet him in the afternoon sunlight, allowing him to see everything clearly. There was nothing hidden, nothing mysterious. Just an elf, 2 dragons, and a human healer standing between 2 worlds. William walked slowly toward Lyra, his eyes taking in every detail. Her silver hair caught the sunlight. Her pointed ears rose above her head. Her posture held the grace of someone who had lived for centuries. When he finally stood before her, he held out his hand. I am William, mayor of Riverside. Claire tells me you saved her life by letting her save yours, in a manner of speaking. Lyra took his hand, and the gesture meant something profound. It meant trust. It meant the possibility of peace. I am Lyra. This is Ember, and this is Ash. We are grateful that your people have one healer who chose compassion over fear. William turned to look at the dragons. He walked slowly around Ember, examining her without touching. Then he approached Ash and did the same. When he finished, he stood in the center of the clearing with an expression of wonder on his weathered face. They are magnificent, he said quietly. Absolutely magnificent. And you are telling me that these creatures have lived in our mountains all this time? And no one in Riverside has ever had to flee or fight or die? Lyra nodded. We have no interest in your settlement. We take only what we need from the land. We harm no one. We simply live as you live. Then I think, William said, looking between Lyra and Claire, that it is time for Riverside to know the truth. Not all of them will accept it easily. Some will be afraid. Some might even be angry. But you deserve to be known. The dragons deserve to exist without humans hunting them. And my people deserve to know that wonder and magic still exist in the world, even if they are just natural things that we do not yet understand. That night, the mayor of Riverside called a town meeting. He stood before his people and told them about the elf woman in the mountains. He told them about dragons that were intelligent and peaceful. He told them that Claire had been working with both to prove that understanding was possible between their peoples. The townspeople reacted exactly as William had predicted. Some were amazed. Some were afraid. Some were angry that they had not been told sooner. But William was a fair and reasonable leader, and he proposed something that had never been proposed before. A delegation would be sent to meet Lyra and the dragons. Only volunteers. Only people who were curious enough to overcome their fear. 17 people volunteered. They climbed the mountain path on a clear afternoon, led by William and Claire. When they reached the clearing where Lyra waited with Ember and Ash, many of them gasped. Some stood frozen, unable to believe what they were seeing. But slowly, carefully, they began to understand that the stories and legends of their ancestors had been true, but the truth was far more beautiful than anyone had expected. The delegation from Riverside stood in silence as they took in the sight of the dragons. An old man named Marcus was the first to move. He walked forward slowly, his walking stick tapping on the stone. Ash watched him approach with calm golden eyes. When Marcus stopped a few paces away, the ancient dragon lowered his head in a gesture of respect, and the old man began to cry. I thought they were gone, Marcus said, his voice breaking. I thought the dragons had all been hunted to extinction 100 years ago. My grandfather told me stories about them, about how beautiful they were. I have lived my entire life thinking those stories were just myths. But here you are. A young woman named Rebecca stepped forward next. She was perhaps 25 years old, with curious eyes and the kind of courage that only comes from refusing to let fear make your decisions. She looked at Lyra and asked directly, "What do you need from us? How can humans and elves coexist?" Lyra smiled at the directness of the question. At first, we need only understanding and silence. The world beyond Riverside will not welcome the news of elves in the mountains. There are people who would want to exploit you or us or the dragons. But if we have time, if we can build trust and friendship here in Riverside, then perhaps we can find a way for both our peoples to live peacefully. Eventually, we might even find ways to help each other, the way Claire has helped us. A farmer named Henry spoke up. I have lost cattle to unknown predators over the years. I always assumed it was wolves or mountain lions. How do I know the dragons did not kill my animals? Ash made a sound. a kind of gentle rumble that seemed to communicate something between irritation and amusement. The dragon turned to face the farmer directly. "If I wanted your cattle, Henry, I would take them openly. I do not sneak about stealing food like a common thief. Your cattle have been taken by wolves and mountain lions as you suspected. The dragons have been hunting larger prey in the deep mountains far from your farms." The farmer's eyes went wide. "The dragon just spoke to me. In my own language. We have had many centuries to learn your tongues," Ash explained. "It is not difficult when you live for as long as we do." Over the next hours, the townspeople asked questions and Lyra answered them. She explained the history of elves and dragons going back thousands of years. She talked about the wars that had driven them from the lowlands into the mountains. She described how her people had learned to live in harmony with nature and with the dragons, becoming protectors rather than destroyers. When darkness fell and the townspeople prepared to descend the mountain, something unexpected happened. Rebecca asked if she could stay the night. She wanted to help Lyra prepare food and tend to the dragons. She wanted to learn more about elf culture and dragon behavior. Lyra looked at Claire, who nodded encouragement. "Yes, Rebecca, you may stay. But you must understand that this is a long commitment. If you choose to learn our ways, you will need to return many times." Rebecca smiled. "I want that. I want to be a bridge between our peoples. I want to help build something new." By morning, word had spread through Riverside that a human girl had spent the night with the dragons and the elves and had returned unharmed. In fact, Rebecca came back to the settlement with stories about how intelligent and kind the dragons were. She talked about teaching Ash human games and how the ancient dragon had found them amusing. She described the food that Lyra had prepared and how delicious it was. She spoke about the music that Lyra played on an instrument made of wood and silver, music that seemed to touch something deep in her soul. More volunteers came forward wanting to visit the mountains. William established a schedule ensuring that only small groups went at a time. He made rules to protect both the human visitors and the dragons. No weapons were to be brought. Everyone was to show respect and courtesy. Visitors were to be honest about their fears and questions. Claire worked with Lyra to develop a way for humans and elves to communicate more effectively. They created a system where human settlers could leave messages at a specific location halfway up the mountain, and elves could respond. This allowed for practical arrangements about hunting seasons and land use, ensuring that human activities and elf activities did not interfere with each other. 3 months passed. The secret of the dragons and elves was no longer a secret in Riverside, but William had been careful to ensure that knowledge did not spread to distant settlements. He recognized the danger that would come if larger powers learned about the dragons. He knew that kingdoms and lords would want to capture them or control them. So the information remained contained within Riverside, protected by the loyalty of people who had been changed by meeting magic in human form. But secrets have a way of leaking out. No matter how carefully they are guarded, one day, a merchant arrived in Riverside from a distant city. He had heard rumors about dragons and elves in the mountains. He had come to investigate, and he had brought soldiers with him. The merchant's name was Gregory, and he saw elves and dragons not as wonders to be preserved but as commodities to be exploited. William met Gregory with careful diplomacy. He tried to convince the merchant that what he had heard was exaggerated, that there were no elves or dragons, just stories that townspeople told to entertain themselves on long winter nights. But Gregory was not a man who believed in such convenient lies. He demanded to be taken to the mountains. He demanded to see the creatures for himself. And when William refused, Gregory threatened to take his soldiers and search the mountains anyway. That was when Rebecca did something brave and dangerous. She rode to the mountains as quickly as her horse could carry her, racing up the familiar paths to warn Lyra. She found the elf woman sitting by a fire, playing her silver instrument. "They are coming," Rebecca said, breathless from her desperate ride. "A merchant and soldiers. They want to capture you." Lyra set down her instrument and stood. She called to Ash and Ember, and both dragons came running. For the first time, Lyra's calm was shaken. Fear crossed her ancient face. "We have only 2 choices," she said. "We can fly away, abandon the mountains and everything we know, or we can make a stand and hope that the humans of Riverside will remember that friendship is stronger than greed." Rebecca gripped Lyra's hand. "The people of Riverside will stand with you. I promise you that. We have learned what it means to have elves and dragons as friends. We will not let them be taken. That night, as Gregory and his soldiers marched toward the mountains, they had no idea that they were about to face an alliance that none of them had anticipated. They had no idea that the townspeople of Riverside were gathering weapons and preparing to defend an elf woman and 2 dragons. They had no idea that a new chapter in history was about to be written, one where humans chose to protect the magical things in their world instead of destroying them. The morning of confrontation arrived with a cold mist hanging over the mountains. Gregory and his soldiers reached the base of the mountain trail just as the sun was beginning to rise. The merchant rode at the front, flanked by 15 armed men who had been hired to protect his interests and capture anything valuable. They moved with the confidence of people who believed that violence and superior numbers could overcome any obstacle. What they did not expect was to find a human barricade waiting for them. William stood at the head of a group of 40 townspeople from Riverside. They carried tools that had been converted into weapons, pitchforks and hammers and sturdy wooden staffs. Behind them, Rebecca stood with her hand resting on a bow. The people of Riverside had never been soldiers, but they had learned something that was more powerful than military training. They had learned that some things were worth fighting for. Gregory laughed when he saw them. "You think townspeople can stop soldiers? Move aside, old man. This does not concern you." "It concerns every person here," William said calmly. "The elves and dragons in these mountains are under our protection. They have done no harm to anyone. They have helped us, and we will not allow them to be captured or enslaved." "You are making a grave mistake," Gregory said, and he signaled his soldiers to advance. But the soldiers did not advance far, because rising above the mountains came 2 dragons, their scales glowing in the morning light. Ember's red scales caught the sunlight and turned her into a living flame. Ash's blue scales made him look like a piece of the sky that had taken solid form. They descended slowly, their wings spread wide, their movements deliberate and powerful. The soldiers stopped dead. Many of them had never seen dragons before, had thought them to be creatures of legend. Seeing them in reality was a different thing entirely. The dragons landed with a grace that belied their massive size, settling on the rocks above the gathering. Ash made a low sound, not aggressive but unmistakably a warning. Lyra emerged from the mist, walking down the mountain path with an authority that came from 3 centuries of life. Her silver hair flowed behind her like a banner. Her eyes held the ancient wisdom of someone who had seen empires rise and fall. She stopped beside William and placed her hand on his shoulder. "We do not wish for violence," she said, speaking in a clear voice that reached even the farthest soldier. "But we will defend ourselves and our friends if we must. You are free to leave this place in peace. You are not free to take us." Gregory stared at the dragons, at the elf woman, at the determined humans standing beside her. For the first time, his confidence wavered. He realized that his soldiers, professional though they might be, were not prepared for this kind of confrontation. He could attack, perhaps even win through sheer force and superior training. But the cost would be high, and there was something about the scene before him that suggested he would lose. He turned his horse around. "Come," he commanded his soldiers. "There is nothing for us here." As Gregory and his men retreated down the mountain, a cheer erupted from the people of Riverside. They had stood against those who would exploit others. They had chosen to protect something precious. They had proven that humans could be more than conquerors and destroyers. They could be guardians and friends. In the days that followed, William sent messengers to other settlements telling the story of what had happened. He did not demand that they protect the elves and dragons. He simply told the truth. He described how elves had helped humans in times of need, how dragons were intelligent and peaceful, how cooperation between species was possible. Some settlements ignored his messages. Some dismissed them as fantasy, but others listened. Slowly, word spread. The idea that elves and dragons existed in the mountains and that they were not threats but potential allies took root in the collective consciousness of the human kingdoms. A year passed. More people came to visit Riverside from distant settlements, wanting to see the dragons and meet the elves. Trade began to develop. Elves traded herbs and knowledge for human tools and medicines. Humans brought news from distant lands, stories of kingdoms and wars and discoveries. The isolation that had separated the 2 peoples for so long began to break down. Rebecca became the official ambassador between Riverside and Lyra's people. She spent half her time in the mountains and half in the settlement, learning the ways of the elves and teaching them about human culture. She learned to speak fluent elf, and Lyra learned more human languages. They wrote the first dictionary that combined human and elf words, creating a bridge between tongues. Ember, fully recovered and healthier than she had been in years, became a symbol of the alliance between the species. She would sometimes fly down to Riverside, landing peacefully in the central square while children ran out to see her. The dragon seemed to enjoy the attention, and she developed a fondness for fresh bread and honey that the townspeople would bring her. Ash shared his vast knowledge with anyone who wanted to listen. He spoke of the history of dragons and elves, of ancient wars and forgotten alliances, of knowledge that had been lost to human kingdoms. Scholars from distant cities came to the mountains to hear the dragon stories, filling notebooks with information that would reshape human understanding of their own history. Claire continued her work as a healer, but now she worked in collaboration with elf healers. Together, they developed new medicines and treatments that combined the knowledge of both species. They wrote treatises on healing that became textbooks in universities and medical schools throughout human lands. 2 years after Gregory's failed attempt at capture, a great council was called. Representatives from multiple human kingdoms met with Lyra and the elders of her people. They gathered in a neutral place, a valley that belonged to neither species, and they negotiated the first formal agreement between human and elf nations. The agreement was simple in its core principles. Both species would respect the lands of the other. Neither would hunt or harm the other without cause. They would share knowledge and resources. They would work together against common threats. And they would remember that understanding was more valuable than conquest. When the agreement was signed, both by human leaders and elf elders, bells rang in Riverside and drums echoed in the elf settlements. Celebrate began celebrations that lasted for 3 days. People danced and feasted and sang songs that honored both the moment of peace and the journey that had led them there. On the night of the final celebration, Lyra stood beside Claire looking out at the gathering. Humans and elves mingled freely now, telling stories and sharing food. Children played together without fear or hesitation. Music filled the air, a blend of human instruments and elf melodies creating something entirely new. You were right, Lyra said to Claire. When you believed that understanding could overcome fear, you changed everything. No, Claire replied gently. I only showed them what was possible. You had the courage to trust, and the people of Riverside chose to believe in something better than the old hatreds. That is what truly changed everything. Ember landed in the clearing, her massive form settling among the celebrating humans and elves. Children climbed onto her back for rides, laughing with delight. Ash appeared from the shadows and let small ones run their hands along his scales. The dragons had become not monsters to be feared, but friends to be cherished. As the night deepened and the stars emerged, Lyra thought about how her world had changed in just 2 years. Everything she had believed about humans had proven incomplete. They were not the simple destroyers her people had thought them to be. They were capable of growth and change. They could choose compassion. They could learn to love things different from themselves, and that, Lyra realized, was what the old stories had missed. That was the greatest magic of all. Not the power to destroy or conquer, but the power to connect, to understand, to build something new together. It was the power that came from one elf woman trusting one human healer with the life of a dragon. It was the power that came from humans choosing to defend creatures they barely understood. It was the power of hope and friendship and the belief that understanding could overcome any divide. As Ember settled her massive head in Lyra's lap, and dragons and humans and elves celebrated together under the stars, a new age was truly beginning. An age where different peoples could walk together. An age where dragons flew freely in the sky, no longer hunted. An age where one healer's compassion had changed the world. Nothing would ever be the same, and everything would be better for that change.